Hello and welcome to the webinar Teen Safe Driving Programs. My name is Matt Fiorentino. I'm Director of Marketing here at TrueMotion, and I'm here with Ben Kodrich.
Hello.
Ben's a data scientist here with TrueMotion. We have a great presentation for you today. But before we get to it, let's make sure you can hear us. Click on the questions button in the control panel and tell us your name and where you're from. Hey, Kristen from Richmond, how's it going? Dougie from the UK. Jean Lopez, hello. All right, well, it seems like you can hear us. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, click on the questions button in the control panel like you just did, and enter your question. We'll try and answer it at the end of the presentation. Before we jump into teen safe driving programs, we want to tell you a little bit about TrueMotion and our technology to give you better context for a perspective on teen safe driving. TrueMotion is a smartphone telematics service provider and technology company. We're driving intelligence for smarter insurance. We're fortunate to work with some of the top insurers in the US, Canada, and Europe. We also have a very experienced team comprised of insurance, software, transportation, and technology executives with a special expertise in signal processing, machine learning, and data science. Our global headquarters are in Boston, where we're broadcasting from today, and our European headquarters are in Budapest. We believe that driving data is the future of auto insurance. It can power the entire customer lifecycle. For example, at New Business, it can tell you how people drive so you can find, price, and keep the best drivers. It can help you process claims faster, identify fraud, and provide a better customer experience. It can help you boost your customer retention and engagement by rewarding safe drivers. And ultimately, it can help you improve the lifetime value of your customers. So how do you get driving data? It seems like everyone wants driving data from connected cars, but it isn't widely available yet. And it's going to take some time. Getting standardized data from OEMs at a good price is going to be a challenge. Here at TrueMotion, we believe that the connected car is here today. It's just not a car, it's a phone. Almost everyone has a smartphone, and people use them every day. They know how to use them. Even our 82-year-old babysitter and a 3-year-old daughter know how to use a smartphone. Smartphones are packed with sensors that can collect driving data, and in many cases, it's better driving data than you would get with hardware. For example, the gyroscope can help identify if you're the driver. It can even tell if you're distracted as you drive. The barometer can tell if the airbag went off, indicating a crash. TrueMotion is an expert in driving intelligence. We put our tech into mobile apps, collect and analyze the data from the sensors on the phone, transform the sensor data using machine learning into information like trips, brake events, distracted driving, and driver scores. And then we make the data available to insure systems for underwriting, claims, retention, ride sharing, and fleet programs. We can tell what type of transportation you're taking, whether it's a bus, plane, bike, boat, or car. We can tell if you're the driver. We look at signals like how you rotate when entering the car. You rotate counterclockwise when you get in the car. If you connect to Bluetooth for making phone calls or listening to music. If you put the phone in the mount for using maps. And if you travel to the same locations, from home to the office and then home again. To figure out if you're in the front or the back seat, we can look at the different vibration signals of the front and rear axles when they go over bumps. We can tell if you're distracted as you drive. We can tell if you're actively using your phone, typing and swiping to send messages, or looking at Instagram, or playing Candy Crush. We can tell if you make handheld or hands-free phone calls. We can also tell if you're using the phone passively, like listening to music or using maps. We can tell if you've been in a crash using dozens of signals and machine learning. We look at signals like rapid deceleration, cabin pressure spike for airbag detection, dramatic directional change of the car, and many more. We use this data to power many insurance programs, but we also use it to power free safe driving apps anyone can download, like TrueMotion Family. And now we want to tell you a little bit more about TrueMotion Family because it's the source of a lot of the data that we're going to talk about today. TrueMotion Family is a safe driving app for parents and their teen drivers. It shows loved ones' driving behaviors. Everyone in the family can see everyone else. So parents can see if their kids are distracted, but kids can also see if their parents are speed demons. It displays loved ones' locations, so you know where they are. The app doesn't need to be open to work, so your teen can download the app, sign up, and never open it up again, but the parent will be able to monitor their driving habits regardless. Everyone who uses the app opts into the permissions, and we don't share anyone's data without their prior consent. We can't see any content on the phone. We only collect the driving data. The survey data that we'll talk about in this webinar is from surveys we conducted with parents and teens who use TrueMotion Family. So why are we spending time on teen safe driving programs? Driving is one of the most dangerous things teens can do. 2,400 teens are killed every year in car crashes. That's 6 per day. 300,000 go to the ER. 16 to 19-year-olds are 3 times more likely to crash than a 20-year-old. Teens are addicted to their phones. The average person spends 3 hours a day on their phone. Teens spend 9 hours. Teens are new and inexperienced drivers who are addicted to their phones. This is a dangerous recipe. But it's also personal. 50% of the teens we surveyed know someone who's been affected by a crash caused by a distracted driver. The general consensus seems to be that teens are more distracted than other people. Let's take a quick poll to find out what you think. Okay, so about 60% of you think teens are more distracted. About 40% say no, and around 3% don't know. So let's take a look at the real data. We looked at TrueMotion Family data for 3,000 drivers over the summer. Here's what we found. Teens are 50% more distracted than their parents. Teens are more distracted at dangerous times during the day, from midnight into the early morning hours. One important note on the methodology here. The percentages are a percentage of driving time. So if a teen drives for 100 minutes and they're distracted 16% of the time, they're distracted for 16 minutes of that trip. This is not a percentage of the overall population. And then there's this. This is a real quote from one of the teens we surveyed. Kids who have grown up with mobile phones have grown up multitasking. It's much easier for us to text and drive. So if you put it all together, teens are dying in car crashes. They're addicted to their phones. They're driving distracted, and they think they can multitask and text and drive. It's no wonder that parents are desperate for solutions to distracted driving. We asked parents what their top 3 concerns are for their teen. Nearly 80% said texting and driving. That was nearly double depression and anxiety, which has been in the headlines much more frequently. It also dwarfs school violence and online bullying. We asked parents, what's worse, texting and driving or drinking and driving? They said they're equally bad. We asked parents what the scariest distracted driving stat is. The scariest stat is that texting and driving increases the chance of crashing 600%. This was the top choice by a long shot. It makes sense though. Parents are worried that their teens' behaviors will increase the risk. It's the most personal stat on this list. But teens say scary stats don't work. So all the stats we spend so much time quoting in the industry don't really mean much to teens because they're not listening anyway. So what are parents to do? What will work with their teens? In the upcoming sections, we'll take a look at government, tech giants, mobile apps, and auto insurance as potential solutions for parents. We'll look at what's working, what's not, and what insurers can do to help. First up, state governments. Parents want help from their state governments with distracted driving. 89% of parents support a handheld cell phone ban while driving. Only 16 states currently have bans. And we know from research we've done here at TrueMotion for Oregon, Rhode Island, and Georgia that these laws can have a significant reduction on distracted driving. So it should come as no surprise that parents think that state governments aren't doing enough to combat distracted driving. Less than 15% think their state is doing enough. Now, let's take a look at the tech giants. Apple controls the mobile ecosystem for iPhones. Google controls it for Androids. Both have a version of Do Not Disturb While Driving. Do Not Disturb While Driving blocks notifications while you're driving so you won't be distracted. Now, we asked our TrueMotion family users if they use Do Not Disturb While Driving. But before we get to that though, let's take a moment to see who uses Do Not Disturb While Driving from this group. Okay, so it looks like about 25% of people say they do use Do Not Disturb while driving, and 70% said no. Seems like everyone knows what it is though, so that's good. So not many of our TrueMotion family users have Do Not Disturb while driving activated, but they're actually a little better than this group that we have today. Parents are actually worse here than their teens. Less than 30% of parents have it activated and about 15% don't know what it is. Over 30% of teens use Do Not Disturb while driving and less than 10% don't know what it is. So Do Not Disturb while driving could be incredibly influential in the fight against distracted driving if more people used it. But the tech giants aren't actively pushing it on their users. But technology can help with the fight against distracted driving. Let's take a look at what parents are saying about TrueMotion Family. We asked parents if the app had inspired conversation with their teen about driving. Over 80% said yes. And teens tell us that family conversations are a key factor for increasing their awareness. In fact, our research shows that teens want their parents to be their role models for safe driving behaviors. We asked parents if the app has made their teen a safer driver. 55% said yes. The same amount of parents said they've become a safer driver too. 60% of parents say their teen is more aware of distracted driving because of the app. We asked parents if they think more people should use apps like TrueMotion Family. Nearly 90% said yes. We also asked parents how often they open TrueMotion Family. Over 70% said they open it weekly. Over 35% said they open it daily. For comparison, most customers interact with their insurance company once, maybe twice a year. So why would an app like TrueMotion Family work, and how can we improve driving behavior for the people who use it? I'll pass it over to Ben to take you through the science behind the technology.
Thanks, Matt. So at TrueMotion, we dedicate a lot of time and thought into understanding how and why people engage in dangerous driving behaviors and what interventions are most effective at changing people's behaviors to make driving safer for everyone, including teens. Listed here are 5 approaches we take to changing behavior. The first is using the promise of discounted insurance premiums as an incentive. So that's the concept of usage-based insurance, which we offer our insurer partners and customers. The second is engaging users with well-established strategies from games and rewards programs. So Matt's introduced the TrueMotion Family application earlier. In this webinar, we also have a free and openly available app called Mojo that showcases some of those features that we've developed. The third is employing the power of social connections, and that's really at the core of the TrueMotion Family experience that Matt has already described. We really believe that mediating these sorts of conversations in real life relationships is a very powerful way of changing behavior. I want to talk about the last 2 of these strategies in a little bit more detail. The first is using large populations for controlled experiments that employ behavioral nudges and financial rewards, among other strategies. And then finally, focusing on the individual to more deeply understand the context and motivations behind distracted driving at a behavioral psychological level. So let me talk about the first one. Our deployments with insurance companies put us in a position to work with insurers as partners to test different approaches to changing behavior in large-scale controlled experiments and using different kinds of interventions, and some of which are listed here. We've developed our own in-house A/B testing system that lets us randomly assign users to groups and receive different treatments. For example, getting a financial reward in a certain time frame that may be a few dollars a week, or much more money over a longer time frame like a month, or a targeted behavioral nudge delivered by push notification with feedback in a particular framing. For example, we might send people positive messages after they've had trips with good behavior, or negative messages after trips they had bad behavior on. So this means we can then test the effectiveness of these treatments by comparing changes in driving behavior between those groups as measured by events that our platform extracts from the rich telematics data we collect. I'd like to talk about one such study that's currently underway that we're especially excited about. We're working in partnership with researchers at the Center for Health, Incentives, and Behavioral Economics at the UPenn Medical School and with Progressive to test techniques for insurers to use to reduce distracted driving among the drivers in their book, using targeted behavioral nudges, social comparisons to drivers who are their demographic peers, and various financial incentives. As far as we know, this is the largest ever federally funded research project to address distracted driving through interventions that are actually ready to be deployed at scale to entire populations. What's really cool about this work is that we've been able to bring together first, some really serious intellectual firepower from UPenn, who brings decades of research experience on behavioral economics to the table. And they have a clear understanding of what sort of interventions are most likely to be effective based on the entire body of decades of research in that field, as well as the statistics and epidemiology chops to guide the experimental design here. Bringing that together, secondly, with the real life setting of a really large population of in-production insurance customers that are enrolled in Progressive Snapshot program. And combining that finally with the granular and accurate behavioral data and the sophisticated driver engagement platform that we from the TrueMotion side can bring to the table. One last thing I want to say about this, and I've illustrated this with the diagram on top, is that the folks at the UPenn Medical School really think of distracted driving as a public health issue. So this experiment is designed with the same kind of academic rigor you might expect from a trial to determine whether a new drug is effective or not. So just as patients who come to their doctor with a high fever and might be recruited to a study to test a new fever-reducing drug and then randomly assigned to either receive Advil, an existing drug, or the new drug, and then researchers would measure whether their fever went down or not. It works in the same way here. So as drivers are onboarded onto the Progressive Snapshot app, we randomly assign them to different cohorts where they would either receive the typical Snapshot experience or they would receive one of a number of different kind of treatments involving nudges, involving feedback on different strategies they can use, and how their behavior compares against similar drivers in the same demographic category, as well as receiving different financial incentives based on their distracted driving behavior. And then we can see whether their distracted driving behavior was actually reduced or not, and determine which of these treatments are the most effective ones. Now, working at a large scale like this is really great for a data scientist like me because it allows us to make statistically significant determinations of whether a given approach does or does not work. But only looking at drivers in this way leads us to potentially miss the fact that these are human individuals that make split-second decisions against a backdrop of their own context, their motivations, desires, and habits. And so ultimately, our ability to design the interventions that we test at scale is hampered if we don't understand those drivers as individuals. So because of this, we have paired quantitative research at the large scale, like the study I just talked about, with qualitative research at the individual scale. So in this work, we recruit people who self-identify in surveys as high distraction drivers across a variety of backgrounds and ages. So everything from teen drivers to seniors, and conduct in-person interviews to understand how they use their phones while driving, why they use them, and how they feel about it. So by engaging people with empathy and employing a design thinking methodology, we're working to understand drivers and their motivations so we can design tailored interventions that can succeed because they address people in their real life contexts. The things we've heard in these interviews are fascinating, and I'll just let you read some of the quotes I've put up here by yourselves for just a minute. Now, there are a lot of commonalities that we heard again and again in interviews. Phone addiction is everywhere. Nobody is particularly happy about their own level of phone addiction, and to many, these behaviors feel like they're out of their control. There's also optimism bias and the illusion of superiority all over the place. People tend to see distracted driving behaviors as dangerous and problematic in others, but they think of themselves as uniquely skilled and able to perform them better than everyone else. But people are also different in really important ways. And we've used what we've learned from these interviews to construct a framework for thinking about how people differ in their distracted driving. And we think this is a really important step in designing the right interventions for an individual as opposed to just a one-size-fits-all solution. So one way in which drivers differ is their readiness to change their behavior. Some people are highly aware that their behavior is problematic. They want to change. They've thought about what change they could make, and they're ready to act, but they don't know how. Others are unaware for the need to change and haven't given it any thought. So clearly, if we have an intervention, for example, that offers strategies, it will be much more effective for one of those two people than for the other. Another important way in which drivers differ is in the motivations for phone use. And we've developed this framework of 5 unique motivators to describe what causes an individual to use their phone while driving. For some, it's primarily work. For example, we've talked to people in the gig economy who work, for example, for TaskRabbit or a similar service, who feel compelled to use their phone for their own economic well-being. For others, it's functional. They use primarily GPS and maps, essentially using the phone as an extension of the car. And again, finding the right path to changing behavior for an individual means understanding where their motivations for phone use come from. And that's going to be different for teen drivers than for drivers in other segments of the population. For teens, it's much more likely to be towards the bottom right side of this chart. So with this framework in mind, we've begun to develop a set of personas. So these are stylized representations of the types of people whose behavior we're seeking to change. So this is one example, and for this persona, phone use is mostly driven by economic concerns. So expectations that she'd be reachable for work, a desire to feel connected, and be reachable. And we've developed a whole range of these distracted driving personas, and they're allowing us to better understand the sort of rich complexity that lies beneath the statistics we walked through in the first part of this talk. And this is putting us in a position to design interventions for behavior modification that have a much higher chance of both effectiveness and acceptability to the user because they're rooted in the reality of drivers' lives. And this is also opening the door towards more personalized interventions that recognize these differences in context and motivations and readiness to change among different drivers. In other words, the sort of intervention that might work for this person might not work very well at all for a teen. So we're working on designing user journeys that help individuals put their phones down with the right interventions for the right people. But in order for us to be able to do that, we need to be able to reach those people. So how do we get apps on phones? I'll hand it back to Matt to talk about the challenge of distribution.
Thanks, Ben. So we have all this behavioral science built into our platform to improve safe driving behaviors. But how do we get safe driving apps on all the smartphones out there? We need someone who has distribution at scale. Auto insurers have distribution at scale. As mandated by law, everyone who drives in the US is required to have auto insurance. But the distracted driving programs parents want aren't widely available yet. To understand how much of a need this is for parents, we asked them if they would change their insurance for a teen distracted driving program. 54% of parents said yes. And it's likely because of the lack of distracted driving programs that parents don't see insurers as a solution to distracted driving today. Only 17% think their insurer is doing enough to fight distraction. So, what can insurers do? Well, here's what they're doing today. There are a number of safe driving programs for teens from many of the largest insurers in the US. The discount varies for the programs, but range generally between 5% and 15%. But if you look more closely at the programs, you'll see that most of them focus on safety training, not safe driving or distracted driving. Teens can get discounts if they pass an approved driver education course. The challenge is that parents want to know how their teens are driving. They want the ability to monitor their teens' driving behaviors. Two of the teen programs we researched focus on distracted driving, and we should mention that they're both TrueMotion clients. They give parents the ability to monitor their teens' driving behavior. The first is American Family's Teen Safe Driver. It focuses on parents with teens. It provides a driver score that includes distraction, speeding, and hard braking. And parents receive a 10% discount on their premium after 3,000 miles of driving. The second one is the Hanover SmartPath program. It focuses on parents with teens. It provides a driver score that includes distraction, speeding, and hard braking. Parents receive an immediate discount on their premium when their teen signs up, but the app needs to be running. And teens can win Amazon gift cards for safe driving, which is something they love. So we reviewed what the insurance industry is doing. What do we recommend? Remember, teens say stats and general info don't work. This quote is a great example. Don't annoy us with distracted driving stuff. It just makes us want to do it more. So what do we recommend? It's probably not a surprise that we think mobile apps are a great strategy for engaging teens and parents with teens, similar to what American Family and the Hanover are doing. If you're thinking about launching a mobile app for teens, here are some general best practices. Make it a positive and fun experience. We've seen that negative messaging can be defeating for users and they'll give up. Encourage them throughout the journey. Gamify the experience based on their driving data. For example, the safer they drive, the more rewards they can win. Add trends or streaks so they can compete against themselves. Make it social. This will add a competitive component and inspire them to win against their friends. And it will enable schools to launch their own programs. Nudge them in the right direction. Don't be overly heavy or dramatic with your language. or your approach. Think of the quote from the last slide. It's just going to turn them off. Teens say they want their parents to be their role models for safe driving. If it aligns with your strategy, find a way to include them in the app experience. And we'd be happy to talk with you separately on a specific strategy for your own company. So let's take a look at what we covered today. Teen distracted driving is real. Teens are 50% more distracted than their parents. Parents are searching for solutions for distracted driving, but it's hard to find help. Tech and apps like TrueMotion Family can help, but they need better distribution. Teen distracted driving programs are popular among parents. 54% would change their insurance to get one. And insurance can make a big impact with teen safe driving programs. And with that, we'll open it up to Q&A. And the first question we have here is around privacy. So the question is, can TrueMotion see what's actually on the phone? Ben, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Two things to know. The only data we collect is data on the driving behavior. So we are not able to see the actual content on the phone. The second thing to note is that all of our programs are always opt-in. So drivers have to actively download and agree to the collection of the data that we do collect.
Great. The second question is, you guys talked about a study that you did with TrueMotion Family users and that teens were more distracted than their parents. How do you know who's a parent and who's a teen?
So that's an easy one. When a user signs up for TrueMotion Family, one of the first steps during onboarding is choosing a checkbox whether they're a parent or a teen, or they can decide not to give that information if they don't want to.
Okay. And then what do teens consider distraction? In your research, have you uncovered anything, and how are they going about combating distraction?
So we have some data from our surveys on TrueMotion Family. For example, when it comes to texting at a stop sign, we asked our teen users whether they thought that that was socially acceptable, and more than half, 54%, thought that that was socially acceptable, and 46% thought it was not. When it comes to texting at a red light, even more, 62% think that that's socially acceptable, whereas 30% think it's not. So there's definitely some level of acceptance of certain distracted driving behaviors. However, with our conversations with partners in the safe driving space, we have learned that on the whole, teens are fairly principled in their beliefs about these behaviors, and they're very caring, even when that can be a mismatch with the actual behaviors that they display. And one approach that we think is very promising that's promoted by enddistracteddriving.org, for example, is to help teens state and express their beliefs, and then also reflect on their own behaviors, and that creates a sort of cognitive dissonance between what they believe and what they think is good behavior and the behavior that they're actually doing themselves, and bring them to a point of feeling uncomfortable about that. And that's a powerful basis for change. That said, you know, what things will work and how can you fight it? We've heard over and over again, both from our own surveys and from speaking to others who are actively working as advocates and engaging teens in the space, that scary stats and scary movie clips just don't work.
Yeah. Okay, here's the next one. Have you found in any of your studies the difference across ages as far as what kind of distracted driving is encouraging? So for example, teens use social media, parents are texting or talking.
Absolutely, yeah. So when we look at, we do see much more granular resolution in our data about what kind of distracted driving is occurring. And so, for example, if you compare the rates of active phone interaction, so things like swiping and typing on your phone, the kinds of things that behaviors you'd see kind of movements you'd see on the phone when if you're using Facebook or texting while driving. That is much more prevalent among teens than among parents. However, if you look at phone calls, teens make far fewer phone calls when they're driving. So there is definitely a difference between an age-based difference between the prevalence of those behaviors. The thing that's troubling about that from a safety perspective is that this kind of active interaction, the swiping and typing behavior, has a much higher risk factor than just a phone call alone, and so that puts teens at an even greater risk than they already are.
Great. Here's the next one. So you believe financial incentives help change behaviors. Can you tell us a little bit more about these incentives? How much? What's the frequency? Is it directed toward all ages or just the teens?
So we're actively exploring that in our research, and so I can't say too much about that other than to say we're looking at all sorts of levels of financial incentives, from saying offering something as large as $50 for a short-term reduction in distracted driving behaviors. We're looking at the effect of small incentives, so offering something on the order of $1 a day, and we're exploring how different timeframes affect that. So is it more effective to offer somebody that $1 a day on a weekly basis based on their performance, or is it more effective to offer them a $50 reward for changing their behavior over a period of 7 weeks, of 50 days? So we're actively looking into all of those things, and are sort of continuing to learn about what works best. But as you can imagine, there's a large spectrum of possible combinations, and so we're going to, even as we figure out what works, we continue to challenge ourselves to find ways that work even better.
Great. What kind of nudges do we use?
So we kind of interact with users in different ways. We found that one of the most frictionless ways of talking to users is through push notifications. But we also talk to users through emails, through text messages, and through communication in the app itself as well.
So can TrueMotion be embedded into an insurer's mobile app? Guessing that there are APIs that can be leveraged for this integration.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. That is something that many of our insurance partners choose to do. In some cases, we will also build custom applications for our insurer partners, and in other cases, we offer an out-of-the-box solution that we can simply white label with the customer's corporate identity, colors, and logos. And so there's a full spectrum of different options available for our partners.
Great. So here's a question about public transportation. If the technology determines that you're on a bus or a train, public transit, does it ignore what you would be considered to do as distracted driving?
Yep, absolutely. That's exactly how it works. And those mode of transportation determinations are surprisingly accurate. So if you live in an area where there's a lot of public transit and you use it yourself, I encourage you to give it a try. It's remarkable. It does get it.
Next one. So are your insurance partners incorporating the distraction data into their rating models?
Yes, some already are, and others are collecting data and planning to incorporate that into their rating. So we were actually the first organization to offer a filed score that included distraction that is approved by departments of insurance, and so that is something that continues to spread. Some are already using it, and some are collecting data and look to use it in future. But it's something that everyone we've talked to in the industry is very interested in.
Great. Does TrueMotion have an OBD2 device that it can use to get higher fidelity data, or is it just smartphone data?
We do not offer an OBD2 device, so we have found a combination of things. One, that the same data that the OBD2 device collects can be collected on the phone as well. and that actually our customers prefer the additional data that we can collect on the smartphone that isn't available on the OBD2 device. For example, distracted driving data, which the OBD2 device, of course, knows nothing about.
Who owns the data that TrueMotion collects?
And that's also an excellent question. So it sort of depends on the agreement, but in general, the data belongs to the insurance company partner through which our apps are deployed. And then, of course, we also have our own direct-to-consumer facing apps like TrueMotion Family and Mojo, in which case that's data that we can work with more directly.
If a driver uses Bluetooth to make a phone call, like a Bluetooth headset, does your app detect it as distraction?
So we do detect those phone calls and we do register them, but we classify them as hands-free phone calls. And so our insurance company partners will interpret that data in different ways depending on how they incorporate that information into their models. For us in general, based on research on distracted driving and the risks of different kinds of behaviors, we rate that as a less risky behavior than in-hand phone calls, and that's a less risky behavior than active swiping and typing types of interactions with the phone. But we do still take it into account, and it does factor into our distracted driving score.
Do your algorithms take into account road signage, speed limit, etc.?
They do, yeah. So we do look at the speed limit on any given road segment that a driver is on, and we're able to compute whether the driver was traveling in excess of that speed limit. Again, in some cases, our partners decide to define their own rules around how that is factored into the score. For us, we ding drivers for exceeding the speed limit by 10 miles an hour or more, or if they travel at 80 miles an hour or greater at all. But that's something that's configurable, so we capture that data at some pretty high granularity and can deal with it in different ways.
Does TrueMotion have a filed solution driving score with in any states? Any of the difficult states too?
Do we know what the latest status is of the?
I think we're close.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess.
So it's we're filed in Pennsylvania,
yep.
New Jersey, and there's a third one, but I don't remember what it is off the top of my head.
Yeah. So we have a great number of filings in progress and are getting very close with many of them. I don't know how much more we can say in this forum.
Yeah. Okay. Do any Canadian insurers use TrueMotion? If so, where? So yeah, we work with Intact. We announced our partnership with them back in May, and I believe we're working with them across the country. So it would be all provinces, and I believe there are different rollout times for each one. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. Lots of customers are suspicious of insurance companies' intentions. Do you work with governments?
So those are two separate questions. In terms of the first one, these are always opt-in programs, and so any individual is free to make the decision about whether that trade-off of privacy versus the potential to save money on their insurance is something that's worth it for them. We don't do a lot of work directly with governments. The distracted driving study that I mentioned, which is in partnership with Progressive and the University of Pennsylvania, is in part funded by a federal highways grant, and so that's I guess an indirect collaboration. We advocate in favor of distracted driving legislation, and so we do try to put pressure on both local governments, particularly here in Massachusetts, where there is a hands-free law bill that has been in the Senate, has passed the House for a long time now, and is block that we're advocating for. And we also have some conversations with officials at the federal level to try and push for better accounting of distracted driving. So we sort of work in an advocacy role, but I think that's pretty much the extent of our contact with governments.
Yeah, like Ben was saying, when these laws go into effect, most of the time they do studies, longitudinal studies, where it takes years for them to get the data back, and we can provide the data in real time. Like we were just looking at the data from Georgia, and after a month that law went into effect, we were able to see that distracted driving as a percentage of driving time, so 20% was the average going into the law, and then it dropped down to around 15% afterwards. So we're able to provide that data essentially in real time to state governments to help them make the case that the law is actually having an effect. Here's one about how we can encourage parents to become models through involvement with their children at school. So how do we do a school program with an app like TrueMotion Family or Mojo? We get a lot of requests like this from around the country, and our typical response is you can go into the app and create groups essentially as large as you need it to be. I don't know if there's a limit on that. And you can run programs based off of that. If you have more specific questions about a specific program, we can talk about this afterwards and help you get something up and running.
Something that schools in the area here have used in the past and had held successful competitions.
Yeah. So this is a question about our partners to run the rewards program. We do. Do you remember?
Yeah. So right now we use a vendor called Virtual Incentives to fulfill our rewards program. So in the Mojo app, that's currently only offers Amazon gift cards, but there is a universe of other kinds of rewards that can be offered through that. And our platform is also set up to integrate with other rewards providers, so that would not be a difficult thing, but that's not currently something we have in production.
This is an interesting one. Does your app detect a driver who prefers to run a red light rather than brake suddenly to improve his score with the app? And so the context for that is hard brakes are counted against your score. So are people running red lights to avoid the hard brakes for their driving score?
Yeah, so we don't have a way to detect that. There's no way for our app to know whether the light was red when you went through it or not. In general, I would say that there's no big impact on your score of any individual event, but patterns like traveling at a speed that makes it likely that you're going to run through a red light tends to be pretty closely correlated with an increased incidence of hard brakes at other times. So I think there's generally these sorts of behaviors and events like blowing through a red light would be would be correlated with other dangerous driving behaviors that we would be able to see in the app.
Okay, so let's take one more. So this one is a question about Progressive. So thanks for sharing that you're working with Progressive. Curious if they find more value with the smartphone-based data versus their snapshot dongle. With smartphones collecting a good amount of data, would they be willing to discard the dongle in the future? So obviously we can't talk about Progressive's plans, but what we can say in general is that one of the reasons why smartphones have been taking off over the past few years is once we really solved the data accuracy issue of being able to track trips and driver identification, hard braking, et cetera. When we saw the battery issues, so that it's not sucking the life out of the battery, as well as the data issues, so it's not killing people's data plans. It's a really easy way to distribute a telematics program. So with hardware, it's an expensive device. You're sending it out. People have to put it into their cars. There's a lot of friction there. So what we've seen overall as a trend in the industry is that more insurers are moving to smartphone only. We talked about Intact before. They had a hardware program and they entirely flipped their program to smartphone because they believe that's the future. And we're seeing many more leading insurers like that adopting a smartphone. Okay, Ben Singer wants to ask one more.
Sure.
Okay, so can TrueMotion reconstruct real trajectories of vehicles in case of an accident?
Yeah, so that's an active area of product development for us. So we are building some very interesting technology in that domain, and that's a fantastic question because the answer is absolutely. If given that our application is installed on a driver's phone, in the event that they are involved in a collision, there is incredible value to the insurer in understanding an insurance claim and better understanding what actually happened in this collision. So a lot of that data can be very valuable in showing when a collision occurred, where the crash happened, what speed the crash happened at, whether distracted driving was or was not involved. That allows us to pull and merge that with local weather conditions. We can see whether an airbag was deployed or not from the data provided by the barometer and so on and so forth. So that is something that our insurance partners are very interested in and that we have an evolving solution for.
Yep. Okay, one more because this is kind of like a marketing question and I can kind of nerd out on this.
Yeah.
So the question is, I noticed your app is a free download. What are the barriers to adoption? So this is a great question. There are no barriers. Anyone can go to the App Store now and download the app. It's free. The challenge is with this, and we were talking about distribution during the presentation, is that the awareness for distracted driving isn't nationwide. And the people who are actively thinking about it, from what we've seen, are typically parents with teen drivers, which is why we have an app that's focused directly at parents with teen drivers with TrueMotion Family, as well as Mojo, which is kind of a fun take on that, where if you drive safely, you can get rewards points and then win a gift card to Amazon. So if you look at the overall mobile app ecosystem and some of the B2C products out there like Life360, you look at their monthly active users and they may have 10 million or so, I think I've seen. And so even with a really healthy number like that, there's still a significant way to go before we get to the entire number of drivers in the United States, which I believe is around 220 million. So the mobile apps that anyone can go out and download, whether it's free or to have a paid subscription, there's not a ton of awareness around it, and you need a lot of marketing dollars behind it to actually drive those downloads. So from what we've seen, to get distribution, you can go the tech route with Apple and Google. They both have do not disturb while driving, but they kind of put it out there and they haven't made significant improvements to that. So some things that we'd like to see is them opening up the API to it, essentially, to allow us to detect if somebody has do not disturb while driving activated, and then we would be able to push people to turn it on, and also be able to turn that on within any app. And then the other side is with the insurers. So everyone needs car insurance when if you drive. So we're working with them to get the technology out into the hands of their users. So there's a lot of benefits there for the insurers themselves because they can streamline a lot of their processes. They can get all this driving data, which is amazing. But then it's also great for the users because they can get all this customer experience basically in real time, and they can save money on their policy, they can get rewards, customer service is a lot better. So that's how we're trying to push it forward, and why an app like TrueMotion Family or Mojo might not make it out to the 220 million drivers. Okay. Are you good? I'm good.
I think that's.
All right, so everyone, thank you so much for attending. If you guys have questions, follow with me. I sent a lot of emails to everyone, so you should have my email address. If not, here it is again, Matt Fiorentino, and that's F like Frank, IORENTINO, @gotruemotion.com, or you can reach out to us on our website. We have a bot that you can talk with, or you can enter in your contact information there, and we'll get back to you. So thanks for all the questions. The webinar will be on demand, and you can watch it at any time. I'll send out an email afterwards with some follow-up materials as well as the video for the webinar. So thanks for your time, and be safe out there.